Welcome everyone to today's Business Spectator webinar titled Social Media, How to Apply Best Practice to Your Business, brought to you by GoToMeeting by Citrix. Apologies for the delay in our starting today, we just had a few technical difficulties. My name is Karis Palmer and I'm Editor of Technology Spectator and I'll be your moderator today. While we're waiting for the last people to file in, I'll just run through some quick housekeeping. First, to keep the note muted minimum and the interaction to a maximum, we'll be providing you with a link tomorrow to the recording of this live session. And speaking of interaction, please take the opportunity throughout the webinar to write the panellists a question by using the control panel on the right-hand side. We've also got a hashtag running today, which is on Twitter is SpecSocial, and as always, we'll do our best to answer all the questions you ask. But it may not be possible to respond to each and every one in this session, so apologies up front for that. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to keep everybody muted, so if you can not speak, obviously you won't be able to talk to us, but you can, as I said, ask a question in the panel. Our panellists today are Nick Hodges, Head of Innovation and Technology at Mediacom, and Kate Carruthers, Digital and Community Manager at Genea, which was formerly Sydney IVF. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Hi guys.
We're going to start things off with Kate, and Kate's going to run us through a short presentation, and then Nick's going to do the same, and then we're going to spend quite a bit of time doing our Q&A, which is really what this is all about, for you to have your questions answered. So as I said, fire those away to us during the presentations, but we'll start with you, Kate.
Thank you. And if we just move on to the first slide, thanks. The two questions that I'm looking at today are about, firstly, are there some social media sites that are more suitable for business than others, and some of the pitfalls for social media strategies and how to avoid them. And looking at the first question, if we move on to the next slide, thanks. It really is horses for courses, and you'll get some people arguing quite passionately that you need to be on Facebook and ignore Twitter, or be on Twitter and ignore Facebook, or whatever. And it really comes down to what you're actually trying to achieve for your organisation and where your audience is. So really it starts out with the question of, what do you want to do? Do you want to publicise, interact, engage? Are you looking to engage a particular audience? Are you looking to engage a particular ethnic group? And using that kind of good old-fashioned marketing and audience analysis, you start to identify which social media and social networking sites are going to be the most appropriate. And for some people, online doesn't even matter. I had a person whose main client was oyster farmers, and I can tell you now, oyster farmers just aren't online. And so their strategy was totally offline. The other sort of question that you need to consider when you're thinking about this is what kind of content you're looking to share. If you're kind of wanting to share video, then obviously things like YouTube, Vidler are the appropriate sites. But if you want to be sharing large blocks of text, then other sites like Scribd and things like that are important. And the other thing is looking at building an ecosystem. So don't just think of one site, social media site on its own. It's about how does it all work together to support what you're trying to achieve, and how does it drive traffic to you. If we could move on to the next slide. And looking at what you want, what are your messages, how are you going to measure them? The other thing that's really important is that you've got to build your metrics in before you start, because it's impossible to retrofit metrics once you've started doing these things. So really I encourage you to start building the metrics in at the planning stage rather than trying to retrofit them later. Next slide, thanks. And when we're looking at pitfalls, I find the pitfalls are all in the same 4 areas, in people, process, policy and technology. And to get this working, we really need to have our people trained and skilled and have role clarity. It's not fair to ask people to do things for which they haven't been trained and for which they may feel unconfident without training. And also with our people, if they don't have role clarity, they don't know what the boundaries are, and they may inadvertently do or say the wrong thing. And the classic example of that was Nestle, when they had a Greenpeace campaign against them about palm oil and orangutans, and they had a fairly junior person looking after their Facebook, and that person really wasn't trained in how to respond when people were angry and aggressive with them, and that caused them a big PR disaster. The other side of that is the process. It needs to be repeatable because from a customer experience perspective, you need to have the same process applied to people consistently. You don't want to have a variable customer experience depending on what day or which person is doing it, and it needs to be clear to everybody what the processes that they should be applying around their social media are. Things like what's your response turnaround time, how do you set expectations and manage those. The other side of it is the technology. From a business perspective, having it's part of this repeatability of the process of having people use the same technology so that you get a consistent look and feel to your response. And the technology is actually available to them so that it will work through the firewall, that they can install whatever they need so that they can do. And from a business perspective, I always like to have technology that makes the social media interaction auditable so that I can actually track down what's gone on, should a dispute arise or should we need to validate it, say for some compliance issue. And the other side of it is, the fourth piece is the policy. Is you need to have policies in place that tell both your staff and your customers what they can expect and how they can be expected to be treated and what kinds of things you will and won't do in your social media activities. And these four pieces all go together, so the people process, the platform or the foundation for social media strategy from my perspective in business. And to me that really ties up with the audience analysis and the messaging side of it. So if you have this foundation, then you have a firm foundation to actually be doing the outreach from. That's over to Nick now, thanks.
Hi everybody. If we just jump onto the first slide for me, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to me and where I'm coming from and what I do and how at MediaCom we approach social, which I hope will set up a couple of the questions that I'm going to quickly address around key developments in social media for business, as well as some of the successes and some of the failures that have come about. So I've sort of been in the digital world for 10 years. That's what an iMac actually looked like 10 years ago. And in that time I've sort of worked within a little mobile startup. I was also a technical director at a sort of mainstream ad agency in Melbourne, and then digital creative director at another mainstream agency, creative agency in Sydney. And all of those things sort of combined to add up to what I do now, which is head up innovation and technology for MediaCom. So MediaCom is the second biggest media buyer in Australia, and as part of Group M, I mean, we sort of spend $1 in $4 that go into advertising. So it's a big challenge within a really large market where we have a lot of clients who are looking to, I suppose, spend their advertising and marketing dollars most efficiently. How does social work into that mix? And actually, how does social go beyond that mix? And if we go on to the next slide, the key thing for me and for what we do is that behaviours are actually more important than technology. So quite often when we start having conversations about social media, people immediately jump to platforms, and Kate mentioned the fact that it's not just immediately about Facebook or YouTube. There's a lot of platforms out there, and actually social media is going to be around in 10 years, and it's going to be around in 20 years. And it has been around for a long time. I mean, social media used to happen over your back fence. It used to happen at the pub. And now all that's happened is the technology has made it more visible. So it's not going anywhere, but the platforms are. So really what I always aim to do is understand the behaviours business and how that's affecting people. So really quickly here, I mean, we've got instant opinion, being shared everywhere globally. We also have instant communication across markets. Market boundaries have really disintegrated in the past 4 or 5 years with social. We have instant access to information through Google, and the fact that Google has become a verb almost globally is sort of testament to that. And all of this is possible through any device, so through mobile, through tablets. And what that's leading to is more content creation. We're uploading 30 hours of video to YouTube every single minute, and a hell of a lot more content consumption away from traditional media channels through YouTube. I mean, watching 2 billion videos on YouTube every day. And one of the results of that is that people are starting to interact with brands even more. So we create advertising for brands that we love, or even just brands that are interesting. I mean, in the case of Diet Coke and Mentos, I don't think anybody particularly loves those brands, but it's an interesting thing that happened there. So you can create advertising for brands that you love, and at the same time you can create movements against brands that you don't love, and you can do that instantly and globally. So going on to the next slide, just to highlight, I suppose, how that comes to life, and to hopefully give you all a bit of perspective on how broad the social area really is. Those first 2 panels there, where we have KFC and Pringles, they're 2 of the Facebook pages that we look after. So, our brands, 3 of the top 10 brand pages in Facebook are our clients, and so we're looking after, with KFC, a community of 300,000 people, with Pringles, a community that's sort of nudging 500,000. So when we're looking at that, it's 2 very different things. It's managing a community and understanding not so much the community, but the collectors within that community, and how to talk to different people within your brand and people that want to engage with the brand. In the middle there is sort of, I guess, the acknowledgement that social is more than just Facebook. Social is very much about content. It's becoming more and more about content, and the fact that content spreads through a network. So that piece there is some work that we did for Alienware, launching a new product range and running an event, creating content, getting it up on YouTube. I think that's up at 1 million views now. So actually, using social as an alternative to traditional models like television to get a message out to 1 million people. Talking of behaviour, and also I suppose to acknowledge that it's not just about working with clients, it's also about internal innovation within business. The little mobile app there is just one that we created out of understanding the behaviour of looking at Twitter back channels, and the fact that people are much more comfortable sort of posting a question via text than putting their hand up quite often at large events. So we created a little app that allows that to happen and allows people to vote. So, we're leveraging the technology and the behaviour to get better content. And then finally, the final screen there on that iPad it's about data. At the end of the day, what we do is about data. We have instant access via mobile, via iPads, and via desktop to all the data around our clients' social, and that's absolutely critical, because we have to justify the investment in these platforms as much as we have to justify investment in any other platform. So that's a bit of context, I guess, around behaviours. Moving into the key developments in social for business. So I think there's really 3 things for us, which is the idea that, or the question of whether you're being outpaced by your customers, and whether your customers are 20 million Australians who are eating chips, or 12 key customers for a B2B business. Is your customer and the way that they're using technology actually outpacing the way that your business is using technology? I think for the first time, really, we're getting this happening more and more frequently. We're having customers that are communicating with each other in ways that brands simply aren't, and consumers and people are expecting brands to be in those spaces. Second thing there, how are you communicating externally? Does that take into account the way that your customers are communicating? Social media can be used for a huge range of communications, from a branding point of view, from a response point of view, from a PR point of view, from a customer support point of view, and from a content point of view as well. if you're not communicating it in the same way and on the same level that your customers are, then, you know, what are you missing out on, and what are they actually expecting of you that they're not getting? And so while those first two things really, I guess, focus on customers, there's also the opportunity for social internally within a business. And I think it's just as important that you are working internally as a business in the same way and acknowledging how technology has evolved. So I don't think we necessarily need to be replacing email with Facebook messages, but, you know, around management, around the idea of innovation and co-creation, handling of data, and even recruiting, there's a lot of opportunities to look at social behaviour and how that actually impacts your business internally. I was just going to the next slide. I was asked for outstanding success and outstanding failure in the adoption of social. Look, there's a lot of examples that they all succeed in different ways. And I think, you know, from your Best Buy or Dell or ASOS in this example, it's simply about that understanding of behaviour and adapting really quickly and adapting with experiments that understand that behaviour. So ASOS, I think, do a great job of this, you know, using quite a almost private social network like Instagram that's not immediately as visible as Facebook to really get content out there, to use Twitter in a really conversational way, use YouTube content because people really want to share this content and be part of the brand. They use Facebook obviously really well, but I think what all these images don't necessarily sum up is the innovation and the experimentation that's going on. They're very agile and they're very willing to try new things. They've recently had a good crack at social commerce, which I think is, you know, obviously going to become a very big thing for retailers. And, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if ASOS are really the first big retailer that do a crack at taking social into the real world. So almost in a way taking social offline and integrating it into stores. I was also asked an outstanding failure in the adoption of social. So this is the next slide, and there's no pretty pictures on here. I think anyone that's failing really in social is essentially, if you're not there, then that, I think, is the only way to fail. I think any business that is in there and is giving it a go, whether it's trialing social internally through a tool like Yammer, or trialing sort of wikis or something like that for knowledge management, or from a CRM point of view, from a support point of view, from a branding and content point of view, if you're out there and if you're giving it a go, I think you're doing something well, because with social, it's not necessarily about out-succeeding your competition. It's quite often simply about out-failing. If you look at an example like Telstra, when Telstra first came on social media with a Twitter account, you know, they got hammered. And a lot of people said it was a failure, but, you know, they really learned, they evolved, they experimented, they iterated, and now they have an extremely good social media program. And the only way that you can learn that, because it does change from business to business, is to actually get in there, give it a go, see what happens, iterate, learn, and keep on going. So I don't think there's really anybody out there that's a failure, because even the people who are failing on the surface are learning and in that way succeeding. So that's about it from me. I think I'll pass back to you, Karis, and we'll get to questions.
Thanks, Nick. And I'll just unmute Kate as well. Yeah, look, there's some questions coming through, really interesting to see, and obviously some really solid guidelines on what people can do, but no doubt people have their own personal questions. And look, there's one here from Nathan that asks about auditing tools. Do you find particular platforms are more suited to this, or do you find it necessary to build something using the platform's API? So I might direct that one to you, Nick.
Yeah, look, the platforms definitely vary. We try wherever possible to have the data ourselves, so be actually retaining the data within our data warehouses. A lot of our global clients especially have to be SOX compliant, so you know, we have to be able to be completely accountable, and also just in the way that we operate in terms of social, it's exactly the same as we operate with any channel that we're investing clients' money in. We need to be accountable for that. So while traditionally that's been about collecting data and analysing and storing data. It's now as much about the content that's happening, the posts that are happening, the responses that are happening, the comments that are happening, so that we actually have an auditable trail there as well.
Thanks, Nick. There's also a question here from Alex, who's interested in some examples from the financial services sector, and obviously that's a sector that has been quite cautious with social media. I know, Kate, you've been following this closely. You used to work in the industry. Have you got some comments on that?
One of the big challenges with financial services is that it's such a heavily regulated industry, and the challenges of getting the policy settings right internally and getting management support for using social media are often the biggest hurdle, and then tracking it and measuring it while you're enacting your campaign is the other side of it. And to me, that all comes down to getting the policy settings right up front. You know, you don't want to end up in the paper for a stupid social media policy like some banks have.
There's another question from Teresa, which is along those same lines, is what are your suggestions for managing social media in businesses with very stringent compliance requirements?
Well, it comes down to having the policies and procedures in place and having the people trained and having good platforms that can you can keep track of what was said, so you have that accountability. And really doing that groundwork up front is critical. It's also critical for getting senior management to be comfortable with it, that when they see that there's a proper compliance framework around it internally, they can be comfortable with it, because you were asking them to do a really big mind shift. You can take 2 days to get a PR response out on an issue sometimes in the old world, and now we're saying it's got to go out in 2 minutes. And so how do we get them to be able to trust the people who are going to do that 2-minute turnaround response? Well, it's by having the right policies, procedures and settings all up front and everybody comfortable with them, and then people trained. And sometimes it comes down to a lot of the big organisations, the sort of multinationals that I've done work with, we end up with the fact that only people who are media trained are allowed to interact on social media, so that you have that same sort of rigour around their interactions.
Look, there's yeah, obviously a lot of interest in particular industries, and that would reflect our audience. There's a question about moving on from financial services to professional services. What does it, can it be effectively utilised for accountants and law firms? And also a question on local government and whether you guys think that local government should be using social media. Point that one to you, Nick, and you could maybe talk to different industry uses.
Yeah, look, I think we work a lot with both New South Wales and Queensland government. So I think from a government point of view, I think there is a massive opportunity, and actually the more local you go, the more interesting the uses can get with social. I talked very briefly about the ideas of collectives versus communities, and I think that's a really powerful thing for government in being able to isolate, communicate with, co-create, get the opinion of a specific collective of people or a specific community of people at a really, quite an easy, quite a fast way is a really sort of powerful thing. I think that, we're still working out how to get there in a lot of ways, and how to put obviously the frameworks and all the guidelines in place. But I think that that's something that we should be seeing, over the next 12 months. Government, especially local government, more and more adopting social, and I think it's hopefully going to be quite a powerful thing. In terms of professional services, there is, and I guess it sort of scales between the size of a business, but I think there is again a large opportunity in professional services just due to the targeting sort of elements. So this idea of almost ubiquitous CRM programs for B2B that using different platforms, so something like a LinkedIn, and even places like Facebook or Twitter, the ability to be very highly targeted in your messaging, and also the ability to collect data and can learn and reapply in professional services is a really good change from I guess the traditional approach to most professional services.
Thanks, Nick. There's quite a few questions flowing through in terms of social media monitoring and how social media monitoring can be used to measure the voice of the customer and how that can be quantified. Maybe, Kate, you might want to have a go at that one in terms of, that seems to be where a lot of the activity is happening at the moment as opposed to actively using. It's more a lot of monitoring what people are saying about brands on social media sites. Do you think that will change, and do you think the measurement will improve?
I do, and it's the typical thing that as organisations want to start getting involved, the first thing they do is lurk, and they lurk sometimes for up to 12 months, just feverishly monitoring everything that's happening and wondering how they'll do it, and then eventually take the big leap. And so you often get that lurking, but I think any organisation that is not actively monitoring its online reputation at the moment is just crazy. It's happening. You can see what's going on so easily. There are good, free, low-cost, right through to high-end tools for tracking your online reputation these days. And anyone who's not doing it, even at the level of Google Alerts, which are free, is really, really losing an opportunity. And the ones that are not, then working out how they can use the data and the information that's gathered from that to use it for customer service or cross-sell, upsell is really losing an opportunity that wasn't available to us in the past.
Well, one thing I'd probably add to that is I guess that with a lot of monitoring, I see a lot of people jump in and start monitoring and then almost want to sort of whack every mole or chase every cat. That they jump in and suddenly they see all these problems and they try to solve them all. So I think anyone who I think monitoring is an absolutely critical first step. But one thing I would say, and it sort of goes for all social, is that you shouldn't be measuring absolutely everything. You just need to understand what's important to your business and measure that. And with monitoring, even with monitoring, you need to set up the guidelines of what it is you're trying to achieve with the monitoring and therefore how you're going to act. Because if you just jump in with eyes wide open, you'll see a lot of problems and you'll possibly get nowhere. But if you jump in understanding what you're wanting to get out of monitoring, I think you'll be a lot more successful.
I think Nick's right there. The important thing there is that all of this stuff that's happening should really tie back to your core business strategy and your marketing strategy. So if it doesn't tie back effectively, then it really is just random activity and you've got to ask yourself why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's easy to jump in the deep end, I guess, given the amount of services that are out there now, but it really comes back to any business decision, which comes back to what your strategy is. That's what I'm hearing from you guys. So there's also a lot of questions coming in, which is the next stage, which is, once you've started monitoring and you've started sort of making the commitment to social media, how do you respond to customers, and is it expected to be done in real time, and how do you resource that, how do you deal with that issue? A lot of questions around that, and I might start with you, Nick, given you sort of talked a little bit to that.
Yeah, look, I think the phase where you sort of jump in and start doing stuff is generally the scariest, and again it's because of that feeling that you have to sort of answer absolutely everything. So the one thing that we do from the outset with every client where we're actually feeding back in over any social platform is just go for consistency. So I think Kate actually talked to this as well about setting up an understanding between you and the audience that you're talking to as to what it is that you're there to do, what it is people can achieve from engaging with you on social media, and being extremely consistent in how you do that. So, really not making exceptions. I've had clients who sort of found a random post on another brand's Facebook page complaining about their product and, you know, wanting to jump on that page and start replying to that. But what that sets up is the expectation that, you know, on any page on Facebook, if you talk about this brand, people will, you know, get a response. So I don't think it's about a time frame. I don't think that, you know, all social media queries have to be answered within, you know, 12 hours or 6 hours, or that every single request needs to be answered. I think it's about setting up consistent guidelines, if possible, making those guidelines known, because the next step after you first start engaging with people is then looking for community moderation. So you'll actually find that people within your community start doing your job for you if you act in a consistent way. They'll be replying to things that they've seen you reply to for you, and it actually gets a little bit easier. But yeah, it's all about consistency, however you're wanting to do it. And that answers the resource problem as well. You know, a lot of people go, oh, this is going to, you know, be a huge resource issue. But if you set up guidelines that mean that it's not going to be a huge resource issue, then it doesn't need.
It is actually possible to underestimate the resource requirement. When I was at Westfield and we first set up the first fashion website, we told people to ask us questions about fashion, and we got so many questions that we ended up with not just the fashion editor answering them, but also a whole bunch of my male heterosexual web developers. And we were totally under-resourced for the demand that we'd created, and it really made me conscious that when you ask people to ask you questions, they will, and you've got a resource for that.
Beware of opening the floodgates too quickly.
Those boys know a lot about fashion now, though.
Interesting stuff. There's obviously quite a lot of people on the line who are in a business-to-business environment, and so as a result of that, there's a lot of questions framed around that, and then asking about LinkedIn and how to use LinkedIn effectively, whether they should be using LinkedIn, and, you know, some of the tools that you guys would recommend for people to look at LinkedIn more seriously. Might start with you, Nick, again on that one.
Yeah, look, the LinkedIn communities are and can be used really well for a client like Dell globally. You know, we've used LinkedIn really well to create these networks of communities or collectives around specific areas. But again, it really comes back to the behaviours thing. You know, what behaviours are people doing, and so therefore what problems can you address? So, you know, do you actually set up communities around specific ideas or specific problems that your product solves, or do you actually want to get people to be part of your product or brand a bit more? Do you actually look for their input on how you could be better? I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think a lot of businesses in a B2B sense jump straight to LinkedIn because it seems like an obvious answer. We've seen a lot of success in doing something like setting up a private Facebook group for B2B as well. It's somewhere where you'll often find people will be a little bit more open and a little bit more casual in their feedback. So if you want to get people talking about your business, that can be a lot more. And again, monitoring. You know, just looking at somewhere like Twitter or blogs can be a really powerful thing, and can alert you to a lot of insights that you might not get otherwise, and actually give you a lot of opportunities to communicate with people.
Thanks, Nick. There's lots of opportunities there. Question from Jenny, and obviously there's going to also, in addition to the bigger companies, there will be some small business owners and participants today, but Jenny's particularly interested in knowing whether social media makes sense, but to stand out, do small businesses need to do something unique or extra special, think outside of the box to actually compete in this space, or Kate, do you think they probably have an advantage that supersedes bigger organisations?
I think it's the same for any organisation, big or small. One of the things that does social media lets everybody have an equal playing field to a certain extent. It comes down to how relevant what you do online is to the people you're trying to contact and reach out to. So if you're doing stuff that is meaningful, relevant, and resonates with your people, then it will work for you, and if it doesn't, it won't. And, you know, really one of the classic examples of that is the Dell Outlet store on Twitter. They've taken an existing online business, all they do is tweet out the links to it. The people that sign up for that know exactly what they're getting. They're getting Dell specials. And so it's a very tight niche group. It works really effectively. It's very relevant for those people, and it drove, you know, I think it was an extra $6 million US of revenue for a very, very small incremental cost.
Mm. Mm.
And I think that small business can have a massive opportunity because of the agility of small business. But I think that sort of point around, you know, do we need to think outside the box? I think quite often they don't. And I think that the key thing that small businesses really need to ask is, does it make sense for us to be here? Are our customers here? Are they communicating using social? And are we welcome? And I think if the answer to that is yes, then you just need to look at what they're doing and act in the same way. So, you know, if you're selling pies out of a truck, social could be a great place. You know, you could implement mobile things. You could have location-based social networks happening. You could build up a nice little community. But, you know, if you're selling, you know, grain to farmers or something like that, then, you know, that might not be somewhere where, you know, farmers might not be hanging out on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube a whole lot. So, you know, no matter how clever you are with how you want to use social, it's not necessarily going to benefit your business if the customers aren't there and using it.
Yeah, again, comes back to the strategy. A couple of questions around people and policy. Alana is interested in how you get senior management to come on board with social networking in the first place. And then, you know, other people are asking, how do you develop a social media policy and what sort of things should it have in it? So I think they're broadly within the same remit, and I think, again, Nick, I might start with you.
Yeah, I think two parts. One is around the policy and one is around getting senior stakeholders and decision makers on board. So I guess starting with getting them on board, one thing is get people on board by scaring them. You get people on board with data. So actually, you know, quite often some key decision makers, you know, don't have a Facebook account. They think it's for kids. You know, they have no idea what Twitter is. And so actually using the data around the audience, using the data around who's using that, if you can possibly look at your audience, who you're talking to, and the data around that. And then it's really about looking at, I guess, the opportunity cost. You know, any sort of senior stakeholder is going to have that question of, if I have to spend money on this, what am I not spending money on? And therefore, is it worth it? So understanding how you're going to measure. And, you know, again, it comes back to don't measure everything. Understand what's important to your business. Measure that. Put a cost against that. I think with social, quite often, it's hard to go up front and say, this is what we will deliver from a cost point of view. But you can at least set up benchmarks and say, this is what we're going to try. This is the experiment we're going to do. And then we will assess that. We will iterate that. And we will see if we can get success out of that. So, you know, data really is the key, and understanding what data is important and how you're going to justify it. So that's, I guess, how getting people on board. The policy thing, I think if you can get people on board, the policy comes out of that a lot easier, and that really comes down to, I guess, working with experienced people, you know, actually knowing and understanding the pitfalls and the, you know, what can happen on social media is a hard thing to do without a lot of experience doing it. So, you know, looking at other businesses' social policy where it's publicly available is very handy, but also running through risk management frameworks and all the usual sorts of things is absolutely critical. And you're going to become very, very good friends with your lawyers as well, because ultimately they will okay everything. And, you know, interestingly, for a lot of our clients and a lot of our people that are managing social pages internally, they're in very close contact with our clients and lawyers, and to the point that we can get things turned around in a couple of hours if we need to.
Kate, I know you've had quite a lot of experience with that as well in terms of dealing with big corporates and looking at policies and things like that. Are you finding that people are getting more sophisticated at that, or is it still a big challenge for them?
It depends on how well senior management are aware of social media themselves in their personal lives. So it really starts with getting, if they already have a mental map of social media, then it's really easy. and if they don't, then it's really back to that right at the beginning and setting out the basics of why this is important and why they should care and what the ROI will be for them if they do pay attention to social media. Just on the policy side of things, what I find is I stop trying to explain it to people in a corporate context. Now, what I do is I just show them examples of good ones that I've seen, and the three that I tend to use, I use the ABC, Telstra and Mosman Council. And I just show them theirs and I say, okay, so what should ours look like? What does your, working as a group with your business strategy and your customer base, what do you need to make your one look like? And that's how we work it.
I think people love to see real life examples, and yeah, there's lots of questions about that. People really want specifics, can you name companies that have done this really well? And I think you guys have done a good job of naming quite a few of them already. The other strong stream is around return on investment. Question from Bryce, is there a solid way to prove ROI on social investment? Particularly, he's interested in FMCG, but says clients want to know if sales can be tied back to engagement or interaction on social channels, but often there's a gap in the data. Do you agree with that, Nick?
I agree that everybody wants to understand the ROI. It can be hard to measure, but it's absolutely not impossible to measure. I think a lot of people go for a fairly easy route when it comes to measurement, and the best measurement that we do is with clients who are absolutely on board with social, absolutely understand it's critical, and then we work with them on absolutely proving the ROI and understanding the metrics around it. How that comes to life and how we actually get to good measurement is by really integrating into the rest of their data. So we try to not treat social as an island. We obviously deal with a lot of data beyond just social. So we can actually, for some clients we're getting sales data on an hourly basis. So actually, being able to test and learn in much the same way that we do with any media or marketing activity is absolutely critical. We've done stuff like run offers just on Facebook and being able to understand how that's affected footfall in certain stores. We've been able to measure the impact of content on sales, and it is actually an area that allows a lot more precise measurement than almost any other media. But again, it comes down to what are the important things to measure, and not measuring absolutely everything, just the things that are important, and actually crafting social execution that is absolutely tailored to measuring the impact and the outcome of those things. But it actually all starts with having a client that's completely on board as well.
So Nick, you mentioned getting sales data for some clients. What are some of the other specific metrics that you have measured?
Yeah, look, sales is obviously the ultimate. It's also often the hardest. So we measure things like inbound traffic, so actually moving traffic from social back to a client's website. Doing things like measuring the uplift in mobile engagement if we're talking about retail and trying to engage people out when they're near a store. So actually looking at an uplift in mobile access either to a Facebook page or to a website. Using things like vouchering, so we were one of the launch partners for Facebook, the check-in deals. So that's an easy way to measure. So quite often it does come down to proxy measures, but I think that proxy measures online are often better than the proxy measures that we use when we're running other sorts of media. So it's really about looking for what those measures can be.
Thanks, Nick. Another way of looking at this is a question around who should be managing social media. And there's a question from Taz, isn't outsourcing social media management contrary to the point of social media? Isn't it best managed by a business themselves? And I know, Kate, you'll have some views on that one.
Yeah, I do think it's a core part of the business, and that it really does need to be in-house. You may need some additional arms and legs to help make it happen from time to time, but I really think the business needs to own it. And I especially think that it shouldn't live in the technology-centred part of the business, and it should be tied to the part of the business that is reaching out to customers and clients and consumers.
Mm-hmm. And Nick, you know, again, questions around where it should sit. We've had some people suggest, you know, it should sit with PR. Some people suggest it should sit with the comms. What are you seeing, and what works most effectively?
What works most effectively is businesses who are open to using social and to looking at where it works. I would love all my clients to have sort of community managers or that sort of person sitting in-house. I think there's still a critical role that external providers play in terms of an overall strategy. So how does, you know, again, social is not an island. How does what you're doing in social media relate to, you know, marketing activity that you're doing on TV? If you've got TV running, then there's a good chance that people are seeing that television while they've got a smartphone in their hand or a laptop on their laps. And then are they searching for that, running a search campaign for that? Is the search campaign pointing back to the social platform? So I think that the actual day-to-day management and I guess the more PR and messaging part of social is something that I think and I would love to see in every business moving forward. But how that links in to all of the communications that a business is doing, I think is still something that you know, agencies especially can, whether that's PR, whether that's creative, whether that's media, whatever, play an absolutely crucial part.
Thanks, Nick. And any last comments from you, Kate?
I think the interesting thing that we're seeing here at Genea is that there's a recognition between myself, PR, marketing and the business that we're all responsible for social because social is part of everything we do, and that it all ties back to the business strategy, and it's just business now, it's not social.
That's a nice end point we'd want to end up at, I think, and with that we might leave it there, guys. We do apologise that we started a little bit late, but everyone, I'd like you to take the opportunity to thank our panellists, Nick Hodges and Kate Carruthers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Also, point you to the Twitter feed that we've had today, which is Spec Social, and people will be sent a link to the recording tomorrow, and it will be up on the website. I'd also like to point you to the exit survey when you finish. Please take some time to give us some feedback and as always suggest new topics. And thank you to our sponsors who make this event possible. That today is GoToMeeting by Citrix. And also thanks to everyone for attending and for your involvement in today's event. We really appreciate it. It's been a record number of attendees today, I think, so we'll have to check that. But obviously there's a strong interest in social media for business. And we hope to see you again on another webinar, and thank you for participation, and we'll talk to you soon.